The FBI has just 3 more days to complete its reopened background check into Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. So far, just one of Kavanaugh's accusers has been interviewed by the FBI, Deborah Ramirez. The other 2, Christine Blasey Ford and Julie Swetnick, have not, as far as NBC knows, spoken to the FBI. While we're aware of the allegations brought by Ford against Kavanaugh, having heard her Senate testimony last week, Swetnick's allegations, as you just heard us discuss, are not nearly as clear. Swetnick sat down with Kate Snow and laid out what she alleges happened at parties she said she attended with Kavanaugh and Mark Judge.
I was physically assaulted in every way you could possibly physically assault a woman. It was horrible. I had no way to fend them off.
You know what I'm going to ask. Everyone is wondering if one of those people was Brett Kavanaugh.
I cannot specifically say that he was one of the ones who assaulted me, but before this happened to me at that party, I saw Brett Kavanaugh there, I saw Mark Judge there, and they were hanging about the area where I started to feel disoriented, and where the room was, and where the other boys were hanging out and laughing. I saw him push girls against walls. He would pretend to stumble and stumble into them and knock them into a wall. He'd push his body against theirs. He would grope them.
Did you see Brett Kavanaugh, you know, spiking the punch, putting grain alcohol in the punch?
I saw him giving red Solo cups to quite a few girls during that time frame, and there was grain punch at those parties. And I would not take one of those glasses from Brett Kavanaugh, excuse me. I saw him around the punch, I won't say bowls or the punch containers. I don't know what he did, but I saw him buy them, yes.
All right, Swetnick provided NBC News with the names of 4 friends who she said went to the parties with her. 1 is deceased. 2 others did not respond to requests for comment. A 4th told NBC News he didn't remember Swetnick. We should also remind everyone that Judge Kavanaugh has denied all allegations against him. Joining me now is my friend Ari Melber. He's the host of The Beat, and he's our chief legal correspondent. Ari, this interview first aired on The Beat. What's your impression of it?
My impression is that the interview did not necessarily help Ms. Swetnick corroborate the consistency of her claims, because, as Kate pointed out in her reporting, and as NBC News has been careful to note throughout its efforts to verify the story, she, if anything, changed a few details. And number 2, and this is important because it goes back to the original declaration submitted by Michael Avenatti, she is not alleging that Brett Kavanaugh attacked her or committed a crime against her. And so that makes her, although she has been sort of lumped in by some as one of the so-called, quote, accusers, that makes her fundamentally different by her own claims than Dr. Ford.
All right. You heard Cynthia Oxney a few minutes ago saying she found Christine Blasey Ford credible, because Cynthia has prosecuted sex crimes. She said not only did she not find Julie Swetnick credible, but she said it actually hurts the efforts to get to the bottom of what happened to Christine Blasey Ford. Just help me analyze that a little bit.
Well, I think that was an interesting segment. I think that breaks into 2 pieces. The first is the testimonial credibility, which is something that is always at issue here. Normal people say, you know, I believe that person or I don't.
Right.
Lawyers talk about impeaching witnesses and whether someone is a character witness or a credible fact witness, and that's one person's view about that. I think the larger question is probably unknowable. Everyone has been rushing throughout this process to say what helps or hurts in a given case. The truth is, we didn't know when Dr. Ford's anonymous letter first surfaced whether it would lead to anything or whether she would testify or how credible she would be. When she did testify Thursday, we didn't know that by Friday there would be an investigation for a week that would lead to reaching out to other people. So far be it for me as a reporter like yourself watching all this to say whether it hurts or helps the wider
cause.
Plus,
it's not going to be addressed by a court or a judge or a jury.
Right. We're not going to have an ultimate fact finding. I will say at a more broad level, what we are seeing in public that is now so controversial is the messy process of the Senate's role in advise it consent.
Right.
It is not like a court where there are ordained due process rules.
Right.
It is a legislative body that sometimes picks and chooses aspects of court procedure. And so this is a one-week investigation. I think it's fair to say as a lawyer and a journalist that more time often helps you get to the story. But the Senate also is going to set its own rules about timing. And so what we're learning is that the Senate wants to push the FBI and the White House to bring in at least a little more information. It doesn't appear thus far, as you mentioned in your setup, that includes Ms. Swetnick. So this is more for the public debate or the public record than the Senate. But that, too, could change depending on what they find and what leads they get.
Do you think that the president or the Senate is trying to convince people that what they were witnessing last week is a legal proceeding and hence has to meet the bar that you would have either in a civil case, which is lower than that you'd have in a criminal case? But the prosecutor, Rachel Mitchell, who did the questioning, said you couldn't prosecute this case. That wasn't what the Senate was supposed to be doing.
Exactly. I think that's a great question, and the premise to your question points out something we should all keep in mind wherever one is on this story, which is anytime you hear people talk about the presumption of innocence in court, which relates to whether or not you go to jail, whether you lose your liberty.
Right.
There is no presumption of innocence in job interviews or in the Senate's advise and consent powers. And other people have been knocked out of other posts under the Senate's advise and consent for a range of reasons, for less than this allegation, which isn't to say that resolves it. So, no, it's not court. Yes, it's a job interview, and it's ultimately up to the Senate to figure out what it wants to say is disqualifying.
Ari, always good to have you and your knowledge with us. Thanks very much.
Sir.
Ari Melber is the host of The Beat. You can watch it today at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.